you can introduce yourself. Jim may lay forth his views and then open it for questions, or, you know, feel free to ask him questions. I don't know, are you going to talk a little bit first, then ask questions? Okay.
From Evansville, Indiana. And who heard or saw me preach on the sidewalk last November? A few of you. Oh, good, most of you. All right, so this is on the Scopes trial. And I've been talking to Dr. Messer, and he said you went down to Dayton and had a good 3-hour lecture from Dr. Intelligentology from Harvard, who's a professor down there, who's a young Earth creationist. I am a young Earth creationist myself, and he said there's like 2 or 3 of you here in that spectrum, and it ranges from theistic evolution all the way to almost atheism. Maybe a few atheists in the class. But we're on the Scopes trial, and I want to go through just basically the principal players of the Scopes trial. As you know, Austin Peay was the governor of Tennessee, so he's a principal player because he actually signed legislation into being. And the state legislature, John Butler, who authored the Butler Act that passed on March 21st, 1945. The Butler Act made it unlawful for any teacher, now I'm going to quote from the statute itself, part of it, unlawful for any teacher in any of the public schools of the state to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man has descended from a lower order of animals. Now there's the trial, that's the statute that, as you know, John Scopes was tried on and convicted for. And so they had to prove, now that's a tough statute there, they got to prove, first of all, what is the divine creation as taught in the Bible. And so there was the burden of proof of how John Scopes would be convicted of violating that ordinance. All right, so first they had to find out what does the Bible teach on creation in order to convict John Scopes. As you know, should know, the American Civil Liberties Union put an advertisement out, and Mr. George Rapelier, is that how you pronounce his name? Okay. Rapelier, a staunch evolutionist and local businessman in Ray County, Tennessee, after reading the ACLU advertisement, called a meeting in Fred Robinson's drugstore. Is that drugstore there still there? Did you see that? Or
We saw where it used to be.
Used to be, okay.
There's a little plaque that said, used to be here.
Okay. A famous drugstore, it's not there anymore. On Main Street, and they calculated how to bring the national attention to Dayton, Tennessee, as he was a businessman and wanted to have a sole proprietorship and make some money on this deal. And so they drugged John Scopes in from an actual tennis game in order to attend the meeting. All right, and John Scopes was a football coach, and he wasn't even really an evolutionist or a biologist teacher. And he later on admitted that you learned after the trial was over, he never even taught evolution. All right? And so it was just a pure scam and a hoax in the first place, and it's a test case for the ACLU. And also, they wanted to smear Christianity and bring a reproach to Christianity and the Bible and God, as George Rapelier was a staunch evolutionist, and so he wanted to bring discredit to God and the Bible, and anybody else who believed in it. All right, so we have Judge John T. Ralston, who was a Methodist lay minister, who presided over the trial, and he carried a Bible with him to the courtroom. And he opened up each day with prayer, and only grudgingly removed a banner in the court that reminded jurors to read the Bible, read your Bible. And he found Clarence Darrell actually one time in contempt of court, as you should have learned. And so you have 12 jurors that sat for the 7 days from July 10th through the 17th. And then you have William Jennings Bryan, the Christian orator, and originally from Illinois, known as the Great Commoner, was a populist and a fixture in American politics since the late 1800s. He had been a congressman, a 3-time Democratic contender for the presidency, and the Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson. His fundamentalist views were widely embraced throughout the rural South, and he was the nation's most prominent voice against Darwinism, which he termed atheism. He allowed himself to be cross-examined during the trial, He died 5 days after the trial and was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, which is a great honor. His son, William Jennings Bryan Jr. was there. Other prosecutors, McKenzie, General Stewart. Also, other principal players, Clarence Darrell, 68 years old, perhaps the most famous American lawyer of the 20th century. Darrell was known for defending labor leaders and radicals, as well as high-profile murders. Perhaps his most famous clients were Nathan Leopold and Richard Lieb, the two wealthy Chicago teens convicted of killing a schoolmate who Darrell helped escape the death penalty. Darrell had been drawn to politics but lost in the 1896 campaign for Congress, and he blamed Bryan for Democratic defeats in several elections, in which Bryan was the Democratic candidate. Darrell was born in rural Ohio, considered himself an agnostic, but many believed he was an atheist. He was disturbed by the deep-rooted influence of religious fundamentalism throughout rural America, a fact that made the Scopes trial as much a personal crusade for him as it was for Bryan. Darrell practiced law for another 13 years afterwards. He died in Chicago in 1938 at age 80. All right, your two main opponents were, as you know, Clarence Darrell and William Jennings Bryan. Arthur Garfield, the ACLU defense attorney, was there. Dudley Malone, their defense attorney. H.L. Mencken, reporter for the Baltimore Sun. Have you read any of his articles that he wrote?
I don't think I've actually read the article. They read how
About?
Yeah, about and how critical he was.
You found out he wasn't too factual, right? Right. Actually, he would make, his name just slipped my tongue. Clinton's watchdog, married to a conservative woman.
Oh, James Carville.
Yeah, he'd make James Carville look honest. Okay. All right. And Mencken wrote irreverently about the trial, and the Sun offered to pay Scopes' fine if he were to be found guilty. So Scopes had nothing to lose himself. The ACLU was representing him for free. If he had a fine, the Baltimore Sun would pay his fine. You have a Dr. Maynard Metcalf, zoologist at Johns Hopkins University, Darrell's first witness and the defense witness, and the prosecutors protested Metcalf's testimony. So Judge Ralston excused the jurors while Metcalf was initially questioned. As you know, that the jurors never heard any of the professional expert witnesses or testimony. The fact of evolution, Mr. Metcalf said, the fact of evolution is a thing that is perfectly and absolutely clear. Now, to get a man from Johns Hopkins University, a zoologist, to say the fact, first of all, a fact is that which has been proven, cannot be falsified, and when you deal with science, we're talking about empirical science. The word empirical means it's able to be tested, demonstrated, and reproduced, and observed over and over with the same exact results and consequences every time. So the origin of the universe, was anybody here to observe the origin of the universe? No. Can we duplicate the origin of the universe? No. Can we repeat it, demonstrate it, observe it? No. First of all, the origin of the universe is not empirically scientific. Neither is the creation of the universe. It's not empirically scientific. So therefore, creation and evolution is on the same basis, same foundation. They both cannot be proven empirically with science, because you cannot observe them, repeat them, or duplicate them. All right. So that goes into the realm of forensic science. And I'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, see, he said the fact of evolution is a thing that is perfectly and absolutely clear. Well, ever heard of hyperbole? That's a hyperbole if I ever heard one. And it's perfectly and absolutely clear? No, it wasn't too clear. That's from the transcript of his in 113 to 143 on the world's most famous court trials. Dr. Messer said he has a copy of the book. You have Dr. Herbert Mergert from Chattanooga. He said, to science and not to the Bible must man look for the answers to man and the process of creation. That's one of the expert witnesses for John Scopes' side. Also, they called in Dr. Sharon Matthews, Dean of Divinity School at the University of Chicago. The Bible's view of creation is no more denied by evolution than it is by the laws of gravity and electricity. Walter Whitaker, rector of St. John's Episcopal Church, Knoxville, for the defense. I am not able to see a contradiction between evolution and Christianity. So as you know, they brought in expert witnesses in the science field. They brought in expert witnesses from the religious community and to try to show that, yes, there's people claiming to be Christians out there who don't believe in the Bible's account of creation at all. And so they actually take the Bible aside and they go to science to find out answers of creation and origins. All right. I have here some of the transcript of the trial. And I think Dr. Messer said you went through a little bit of that the first week.
They actually haven't heard too much of the actual I just mentioned to them that it's here at the library.
I've been amazed in my research over the years of Scopes trial. Even in the last week I looked up on the internet. Go to the Scopes trial, the University of Missouri, Kansas City law claims to almost have a patent on this and have the real actual details and be the authorities. They won't give you the transcript of the trial. And so, on the website for easy reading, and as you know, the transcript's the primary source evidence of what took place during the trial. And there are several things. William Jennings Bryan started out great. Some of the questions were kind of soft balls at first, but then Clarence Darrow went right for the jugular vein. And from my viewpoint, a creation, young earth viewpoint, William Jennings Bryan let us down. He dropped the ball, and he sided with the scientists and so-called science, and would not take the Bible as it says it is. And I want to go through some of this, and this is where I was hoping I could have got here a little bit sooner and had a copy of this transcript for everybody to see, but I'll make it available afterwards. All right, so right here, Hayes, Darrell wants to examine Bryan. We think there are other questions involved, and we should want to take Mr. Bryan's testimony for the purpose of our record. And here's where Hayes is going to get William Jennings Bryan on the witness stand. That was a clever ploy. Because as you know, John Scopes was found guilty. The first part of the trial, the first several days, it was cut and dry. Many of the news media went home and weren't even going around and just going out and eating and spending time in the shops around the city, around the town of Dayton. But when Darrell got Bryan on the witness stand, things turned around. And so he made an embarrassment on Christianity and the Bible. So here we find that Bryan agrees to take the stand as put forth by Hayes. And so one of the first questions is, Bryan wants Darrell to take the stand and promised to take the stand. How many of you know he did not take the stand? Yes. And that was a little bit dishonest on Darrell's part, as he wasn't known for his real honest tactics in the first place. But he agreed, and right here, Bryan says, "If Your Honor please, I insist that Mr. Darrell can be put on the stand, and that Mr. Malone and Mr. Hayes." Then the judge says, "Call anybody you desire. Ask them any questions you wish." And then Bryan says, "Then we will call all three of them." Then Darrell asked, "Not at once." And so that's where Darrell and Bryan agreed to take the stand. And as you know, they had John Scopes plead guilty, which made the case moot, and it was over on the trial part. All right. So one of the first questions Darrell asked Bryan was, "Did you claim that everything in the Bible should be literally interpreted?" And so, if you can get somebody that's stupid to say everything in the Bible is to be taken literally, if you can get somebody to say yes to that, you've got them. You can make them look so stupid. So the answer from Bryan's was, "I believe everything in the Bible should be accepted as it is given there." Now that's a good question, a good statement, good answer. But everything in the Bible is literally true, but not everything in the Bible is literal in interpretation. And for example, he gives the example here as I've always used. When the Bible says that we Christians are the salt of the earth, that does not mean we're 100% sodium chloride. We're not made of total salt, although we have lots of salt in us. Jesus Christ is the door of the pasture. If anybody goes in thereby, he'll find rest to themselves. But he's not a pane of glass with hinges and a frame and a doorknob. And so not everything in the Bible is literal in interpretation, or to be taken literally. It's literally true, he really is a door, but it's metaphorical speech of showing how he's an entrance into life. Alright, so William Jennings Bryan did fielded that question real good. He was not going to take everything literal, because he said, some of the Bible is given illustratively. For instance, ye are the salt of the earth, Bryan said. I would not insist that man was actually salt, or that he had flesh of salt, but it is used in the sense of salt as saving God's people. And so, next question was, when you read, that Jonah swallowed the whale, I may have said that for a joke, Mr. Darrell may have said that for a joke, or that the whale swallowed Jonah, excuse me please, how do you literally interpret that? The answer by Bryan was, when I read that a big fish swallowed Jonah, it does not say whale. Alright, first of all, Matthew chapter 12, verse 40. Now the story of Jonah does not say whale, it says a great fish. But Jesus Christ tells us what kind of a fish it was. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 40, we find here, for as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly. And so right there Christ identifies it was indeed a whale. And so we find that the questioning went on. Now you say the big fish swallowed Jonah, and he there remained how long? 3 days? And when he spewed him upon the land, you believe that the big fish was made to swallow Jonah? Now I would have asked the question if I was Bryan. I would have said, explain your word made. Because it might mean that that fish was made by God originally, years ago, grew up to become a big fish, and was made for the sole purpose of doing one thing, which was to swallow Jonah. Or that God actually caused or made the fish to swallow Jonah. So it could be meant either way. And he says, I am not open to say that. The Bible merely says it was done. You don't know whether it was the ordinary run of fish or made for that purpose. You may guess, you evolutionists guess. You are not prepared to say whether that fish was made especially to swallow a man or not. And so here we find they were jousting. It was a personal vendetta amongst both of them, and they were jousting, and actually Bryan got the upper hand as he was making jokes, and was quite jovial, and even records here a few times the crowd was laughing. And so the first question is about the whale, Jonah being swallowed by a whale. Okay, then he asks, perfectly easy to believe that Jonah swallowed the whale? Well, I skipped some, I'll back up. One miracle is just as easy to believe as another one, Bryan says. And then, just as hard? It is hard to believe for you, but easy for me. A miracle is a thing performed beyond what man can perform. When you get within the realm of miracles, and it is just as easy to believe the miracle of Jonah as any other miracle in the Bible. Perfectly easy to believe that Jonah swallowed a whale, if the Bible said so. But the Bible doesn't make an extreme statement as evolutionists do. Okay, and the next question was, the Bible says Joshua commanded the sun to stand still for the purpose of lengthening the day, doesn't it? And you believe it? This is in Joshua 10, verses 11 through 14, when the Gibeonites were being put in a battle with the Israelites. And Joshua said, sun, stand thou still. So here, some have claimed the Bible is trying to say the sun revolves around the earth. And so, we had Joshua 10, 11. And it came to pass, as they fled from before Israel, and were going down to Beth-horon, that the Lord cast down great stones from heaven upon them unto Azekah, and they died. They were more which died from hailstones than whom the children of Israel slew with the sword. Then spake Joshua to the Lord in a day, when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. And so it says, and the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. And so the question was, which is which? Does the sun it revolve around the earth, or the earth revolve around the sun? Well, if we're going to take this as the Bible claiming that the sun evolves around the earth, then we can never ever say the sun rises and the sun sets, or the moon rises and the moon sets. Because we say the sun rises, but the sun, as we know, does not really rise. The earth is spinning, as you know. And so it's a colloquial term, and it does not actually make a definite statement that the sun evolves around the earth, as some like to try to make the Bible say it does. And so there's the next question that Darrell put forth to Brian. He's doing very well. He says, do you believe it? Brian answers, I do. Do you believe that at that time the entire sun went around the earth? No. I believe that the earth goes around the sun. Do you believe that the men who wrote it thought that the day could be lengthened, or that the sun could be stopped? So here we have a multiple question here. So the first question is, do you believe that the men who wrote it thought that the day could be lengthened? Well, obviously Joshua thought the day could be lengthened because he asked God to do it. And it's quite humbling to see a man who knows God so well and has such a good communication and relationship with God, they actually would ask God to lengthen the day and make it be lighter longer so they could have 24 hours more of a slaughter. And so, and that's the amazing thing to me, is that Joshua would know that God would do that for him. And, or that the sun could be stopped. So, yeah, well, you have a day lengthened and the sun would be stopped. All right. I don't know what they thought was the answer. You don't know. I think they wrote the fact that they're expressing their own thoughts, exactly what took place. And so he just wrote down what he said, and it happened, and we don't know what they thought, but it was amazing how Joshua knew God would do that for him. All right. Mr. Darrow asked, I read that years ago. Can you answer my question directly? If the day was lengthened by stopping either the earth or the sun, it must have been the earth. And so, you know, we understand that the must have stopped the earth. So this goes back to how the Pope condemned Galileo back in the early Dark Ages. The Pope had made declarations that the sun evolves around the earth. Galileo came around and said, no, the earth revolves around the sun. And so he was excommunicated and condemned by the Catholic Church. Because the Catholic Church at that time, which is a sign of what happens when a religious structure gets political power and makes declarations and enforces it absolutely. All right. Now, Mr. Bryan, have you ever pondered what would have happened to the earth if it had stood still? No. You have not? No, the God I believe in could have taken care of that, Mr. Darrell. I see. Have you ever pondered what would naturally happen to the earth if it stood still suddenly? No. Don't you know it would have been converted to a molten mass of matter? You testify to that when you, okay, Brian says, you testify to that when you get on the stand. I will give you a chance. And so there Brian is telling Darrell, okay, I'll ask you that question. If you have the answer of what would happen to the earth, I'll let you answer it. So he's saying, I don't know what would happen. And so, next question was on Noah's flood. You believe the story of the flood to be a literal interpretation? Yes, sir. When was that flood? I would not attempt to fix a date. The date is fixed as suggested this morning. Question was about 4004 BC. That has been the estimate of a man that is accepted today. I would not say it is accurate. That estimate is printed in your Bible. Everybody knows, at least, I think most of the people know, that was the estimate given. All right. The question, the answer was, I never made a calculation. A calculation from what? I could not say. From the generations of man was the question. I would not want to say that. What do you think? I do not think about things I don't think about. Do you think about things you do think about? Well, sometimes. And it says laughter in the courtyard. And so here they're interjecting humor here, and they're going back and forth. And the policeman has to say, let us have order. So, Brian says that these gentlemen have not had much chance. They did not come here to try this case. They came here to try revealed religion. I am here to defend it, and they can ask me any questions they please. So here Brian reveals the real nature for this trial in the first place was to put Christianity on trial, the Bible on trial, the God on trial, and to make a mockery as if they could against Christianity, God, and the Bible. And so it's presented right here in the transcript. All right, then Darrell shows his real colors, and he says, "You insult every man of science and learning in the world because he does not believe in your full religion." Well, the judge says, "I will not stand for that." And so the judge got Darrell calmed down real quick when he calls it a full religion, as he being a Methodist minister. And if you realize 1925 is a lot more religious than we are in 2004. Okay. Then Darrell says, "Wait until you get to me." Now right there, Darrell is given the impression that yes, he has agreed to go on the stand. He will get on the witness stand. And he says to Brian, "Wait until you get to me. Do you know anything about how many people there were in Egypt 3,500 years ago? Or how many people there were in China 5,000 years ago?" And so he answers no. "Have you ever tried to find out?" "No, sir." "You are the first man I've ever heard of who has been interested in it." And the whole place starts laughing again. And so, next question was, "Have you any idea how old the earth is?" Now here is where William Jennings Bryan lets us down. It's going good for us on our side. It's going good. The crowd's laughing. They see the silliness of Darrell, the maliciousness of Darrell, and it's been brought out why they're doing it in the first place. But now here is where he drops the ball. "Have you any idea how old the earth is?" "No." "The book you have just introduced in evidence tells you, doesn't it?" "I don't think it does, Mr. Darrell." "Let's see whether it does. Is this the one?" "That is the one, I think. It says BC 4004. That is Bishop Ussher's calculation. That is printed in the Bible you introduced, right?" "Yes, sir." "Would you say that the earth was only 4,000 years old?" "No, sir. I think it is much older than that." "How much?" "I couldn't say." "Do you say whether the Bible itself says it is older than that?" "I don't think it's older than that." "I don't think it is older or not." "Do you think the earth was made in 6 days?" "Not 6 days of 24 hours. "Doesn't it say so?" "No, sir." Right there, we have a major problem because Clarence Darrell was being more honest at this point of what the Bible teaches and portrays than William Jennings Bryan. And Clarence Darrell understood the Bible claims the earth was made in 6 literal 24-hour time period days, the Hebrew word yom, Y-O-M, and it says the evening and the morning were the first day. Evening and morning were the second day. It says after all 6 days of creation, and the Hebrew word yom is always interpreted by its surrounding context. And it gives you the context. It consists of an evening and a morning. And so, right there, we find the Bible in Genesis tells us it's 6 24-hour lunar solar time period days. And if it's 6,000 years, 6,000 year day periods, 6 million year day periods, then we have a major problem because that's where Exodus chapter 20 and the 10 Commandments, God gave them this instruction. And verse 9, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. Verse 10, but the 7th day it is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger which is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that therein is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So here, creation, the 6 days of creation, is given for a pattern for man to work. Work 6 days, rest 1 day, just like God did. 6 days, rested 1 day. If he worked 6 million years, or 6,000 years, we have a long work week. And so, we understand, yes, it was 6 literal 24-hour time period days. All right, we're not supposed to work 6,000 years and then rest 1,000 years. All right, so that's where William Jennings Bryan let the ball down. He could not describe or defend the 6-day creation. He's doing good so far. Jonah and the whale, he did good so far on the Noah's flood, but on the 6th day creation, because at this time, 1925, was about, 75 years after Charles Darwin's book of Natural Selection, Origin of Species came out, also of preferred races, it says at the end, which they don't want you to realize, as he was a racist, believed in a master race. Where did we hear that before? And so, Charles Darwin's book came out for 75 years, influenced the Christian world, and everybody thought it was scientific and was well to be explored and believed. And so many theologians, Charles Hodge, Schofield, other people, Phineas Dake, other individuals have put out books on Genesis, the first 9, 11 chapters, and tried to say there's a gap theory, there's a time period before Adam came on this earth where there's who knows how many years, possible millions of years, and allowed for creation through evolutionary processes. And so it's called the gap theory, or the pre-Adamic race theory. And so William Jennings Bryan was influenced by this gap theory, and he was postulating it. And the only problem is with theistic evolution, it's fine if they at least believe in a creator. Only problem with creation that theistic evolution is you have to deny the first 2 or 3 chapters of Genesis as being literal in creation. And why do they discuss about the days that Joshua went around Jericho for 6, 7 days? There's no argument there about how many days it was. But the only argument of the word day in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 1 and 2 on the 6th day creation. So why do they choose that word day and leave all the other days alone? So here's where he was influenced in the religious world back in that day. And since then, most of the religious world do not have to really subscribe to the gap theory, theistic evolution, because, as I'll get into a little bit later, science doesn't substantiate it anyway. All right, so the judge realizes that Bryan has dropped the ball here in the 6th day creation. He's also dropped the ball in the age of the earth. And so when Bryan says not 6 days or of 24 hours, then he's asked, doesn't it say so? Then he answers, no, sir. The court intervenes. The judge realizes, hey, he's getting eat up here. Are you about through, Mr. Darrell? It's quite obvious, and I'll say this even though I'm for the judge's side and Bryan's side, it's obvious that the court saw that, yeah, Bryan's getting eat up here in these last 2 questions. We better help him out. Are you about through, Mr. Darrell? In other words, we want this over with. You're making this look bad here in these last 2 questions. All right. Then it goes on. Bryan says, the reason I'm answering is not for the benefit of the Superior Court for appeal. It is to keep these gentlemen from saying I'm afraid to meet them and let them question me. And I want the Christian world to know that any atheist, agnostic, unbeliever can question me anytime as to my belief in God, and I want to answer them. And so Darrell says again, I want to take exception to this conduct of this witness. He may be very popular down here in the hills. There again, he shows contempt for Tennessee and the surroundings, environs there. And Bryan says again, Your Honor, they have not asked a question legally, and the only reason they have asked any question is for the purpose, as the question about Jonah was asked, for a chance to give this agnostic an opportunity to criticize a believer in the Word of God. And it says, I think there's a typo, it should be in the Word of God. And I answered the question in order to shut his mouth so that he cannot go out and tell his atheistic friends that I would not answer his questions. That is the only reason, no more reason in the world. All right. So, and their question was, the first woman. Mr. Bryan, do you believe that the first woman was Eve? Yes. Do you believe she was literally made out of Adam's rib? I do. Now why, takes out literally. Did you ever discover where Cain got his wife? The old infamous, where did Cain's wife come from? All right, he dropped the ball right here. No, sir, I leave the agnostics to hunt for her. You have never found out? I have never tried to find. You have never tried to find? No. The Bible says he got one, doesn't it? This is the question, were there other people on the earth at that time? I cannot say. Now why can't he say? There again, he's influenced by the millions of years, of billions of years, and the theistic evolution of his day, of the gap theory. So here we find the answer very simply. Genesis chapter 5, verse 4. Where did Cain get his wife? That was one of the questions at the Scopes trial. In the days of Adam, after he had begotten Seth, now Seth's the third mentioned son, Cain and Abel the first two, then Seth. The days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years. So Adam lived 800 years after his third son. And I think right here, it tells you how many years old he was. And Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his likeness, Seth, and called his name Seth. So he was 130 years old when he had Seth, so Cain and Abel came before it 130 years. So here he had 130 years before he had Seth. All right, and the days of Adam after he begotten Seth were 800 years. And he, Adam, begot sons and daughters. Clarence Darrow tried to say there's only two boys mentioned, Cain and Abel, and as you know, Cain slew Abel because Abel was righteous and Cain was wicked, and he was jealous of his brother. And so then Seth comes along, but Cain, the Bible says, went out and got a wife. So that's in Genesis chapter 4, verse 16. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And so here we find there's Cain and Abel. Right after Cain slays Abel, he's cursed and cast out by God. And it's amazing how Cain says this when he gets this mark upon him. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. Well, who was he worried about? Well, there's got to be other people around, right? They was worried about slaying him. And so, where did Cain's wife come from? Well, it's quite obvious if you start out with one man, one woman, that there has to be what we now know as incest amongst the brothers and the sisters. So here we find that Adam had sons and daughters. It mentions there's daughters, so that solves the problem right there of having females. And so somebody had to marry their sister first. Now Cain's wife may have been a sister, may have been a niece, may have been a cousin, by the time that Cain came around 130 years later. And so we don't know whose wife was, but there were females, as Cain, Adam and Eve had sons and daughters. And that raises the question now genetically about mutations and incest and so on and so forth. That gets into, I guess I can deal with that right now. As when God made everything, Adam and Eve, and the world, He made all things perfect. This world's made perfectly in the first place. Our bodies were made physically perfect. We're not designed to suffer death or disease or sickness. And so we had optically pure chromosomes. You could have what we call inbreeding now without having any genetic mutations, because genetic mutations mainly are from radiation. The greatest source of radiation is the sun. Before the flood of Noah, there was a cloud cover, water canopy, or whatever you want to call it, up in the earth. It's where the waters came down from Noah's flood. And now we have rainbows showing the sun's radiation gets through our atmosphere, and our lifespans, the Bible shows, goes from 936 to shortly after the flood to 500 to 250 to what they have now, about 100 to 70 to 120 years of age. And so that takes care of that problem. But originally, they would have relationships with their brothers and sisters without having any genetic mutations. And only later on, in the law of Moses, did God say, don't do that anymore, because mainly because of physical reasons, because of the problems it would have. All right, so he drops the ball on Cain's wife. Couldn't answer that. Couldn't show where Adam and Eve had sons and daughters, and that Cain's, I guess he thought it might be too embarrassing, especially in 1925 in rural Tennessee, of Cain having a sister or niece or cousin, or who knows, how many 130 years, and go down the line quite a bit. And so that's another one he dropped the ball on. Now another one. All right, does the statement, the morning and the evening were the first day, the morning and the evening were the second day, mean anything to you? I do not think it necessarily means a 24-hour day. You do not. So it goes back to the day question again. What do you consider it to be? I have not attempted to explain it. So then it goes on. Then the question is, in the evening and the morning of the second day, that does not necessarily mean 24 hours, right? I do not think it necessarily does. Do you think it does or does not? I know a great many think so. What do you think? I do not think it does. Do you think those were not literal days? I do not think they were 24-hour days. Now, Clarence Darrow realizes the Bible points out plainly they're 24-hour days. And he's grilling Brian on this because this is his big weak spot. Then Brian says, no, but I think it would be just as easy for the kind of God we believe in to make the earth in 6 days as in 6 years, or in 6 million years, or in 600 million years. I do not think it's important whether we believe one or the other. Well, the only importance is, as I showed earlier, is what the Bible says. And if we're supposed to work as God worked for 6 days, rest 1 day, we're supposed to work 6 days, not 6 million. All right. Another question about the serpent. I will read it to you from the Bible. So this time Darrell gets the Bible out and he reads it himself. Amazing how this guy knows what the Bible verses are. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. Do you think that it is why the serpent is compelled to crawl upon his body, his belly? I believe that. Have you any idea how the snake went before that time? No, sir. Do you know whether he walked on his tail or not? No, sir, I have no way to know. And laughter in the audience. So Clarence Darrow interjected his own humor, which was a good source there.
Jim,
all right. Yes.
I just want to point out, we're kind of verging in on the end of our first hour here.
Okay.
And at some point, I do want to have the students the opportunity, give the students
Great.
the opportunity to ask him
That much.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you for reminding me. Now you refer to the cloud that was put in heaven after the flood, the rainbow. Do you believe in that? The answer was read it. All right, Mr. Ryan, I will read it for you. And then, actually, Darrell says, I object to your statement. I'm exempting you on your fool ideas that no intelligent Christian on earth believes. And then the court just says, court is adjourned until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Over. And so that was the examination of William Jennings Bryan with the transcript. And so it opens up many ideas, many questions, many thoughts about creation and evolution. Okay. Also, did you go through any of the scientific evidence postured by any of the evolutionists at the trial? Like Neanderthal man, this is one thing I've found out that the science world does not like to acknowledge. Just what was the scientific world presenting this scientific proof? And so one was Neanderthal man and Nebraska man. Here we go. Piltdown man, which was a combination of a human skull cap and an ape jaw, which was thrown out as a hoax in 1953. That was one of the expert testimonies of Piltdown man. Neanderthal man portrayed as a bow-legged, knuckle-dragging, pigeon-toed, apish-like brute that grunted on his way to becoming a human being. Later on, it was discovered that Neanderthal man was fully human and had suffered from arthritis and rickets. Java man was an ape skull and a human femur. Australopithecus africanus, a skull of an infant ape, which typically bears a slight resemblance of a human child skull. Nebraska man, it was not entered into the trial, but was heralded, as you know, as on the radio nationwide. It was on the press, consisted of only one tooth, and they built a whole man around one tooth. They later on found the tooth was a pig tooth. They talked about vestigial organs, or leftover organs that you don't need. There's 180 of these vestigial organs, and I don't know anybody who would like to have an operation to remove all 180 of them right now. They said that, for example, tonsils and appendix, we now know the appendix has functions. We also now know that the tonsils contribute to your immune system. And so we also know there's some vestigial organs and that are only used in vitro, in utero, because they're for babies and blood flows inside the womb, and they don't have any more function anymore. They've outgrown their function. Embryonic recapitulation, the idea that the human fetus goes through various evolutionary stages in the mother's womb. As you might have saw the diagrams in the textbook, has gill slits and fish and turns into a tadpole and goes all through that. Well, we now know that is bogus, is false. So there's all their science that they presented at the Scopes trial as fact for evolution, which now there's not one evolutionist who believes any of the so-called facts of evolution that was presented at the Scopes trial. All right, I'm done. Questions, comments, reviews? Stones, rocks, tomatoes?
I was thinking while you were talking about the incest, down at the trial, down at the trip, Cornelius said he thinks, his personal opinion was that William Jennings Bryan wanted to answer the way you answered. There were sons and daughters of Adam interbreeding, but he knew that if he opened up that can of worms, like you said, in the rural South, it would look bad for everybody. So he purposely avoided that. But do you know Charles Darwin actually married his first cousin?
Right.
So so it does happen.
Yes, and without any problems.
They had like 7, 8 kids. Yeah. Do y'all have any questions about either, I guess, the literal interpretation or consequences of evolutionary teaching or whatever? It's your opportunity. Jump on in.
Yes.
I guess my question falls within, you were talking about the scientific evidence that was presented in 1925. Science is an ever-changing understanding that goes on around us. So I think if the trial were rehatched today, or had never been tried until today, the facts that we present today would be outdated 50 years from now. So do you think that, do you deny all of science for that very reason?
Deny all of science?
Yeah, I guess you're questioning the statements that were being made, but the statements that were presented in the trial in 1925 led to discoveries or led to understanding what we know now.
So that's a problem of evolutionists. They want you to think that science evolves, and what a fact is today won't be a fact tomorrow. Well, if it's not a fact tomorrow, it's not a fact today. These other Java built down, they were hoaxes. They were figments of people's imaginations. As I said earlier, science, that which is empirically proven, is that which can be demonstrated, repeated, and observed over and over, the same exact results. That's what science is. Science does not change. Science gets us to the moon, gets us to Mars, it gets us to build buildings, and the mathematical principles of science, the physical principles of science has not changed. If they were constantly in flux, we would not be able to rely upon the space shuttle. Or you wouldn't want to get into an airplane if they're in flux. And so science does not evolve, does not change if it's a true fact. Now theories that men say are facts can be proven false all the time. So young earth creationists believe in true science. We just don't hold to everything that people say is science as science. So for example, I talked about forensic science, about observing the origin of the universe. You have to go into forensic science, which deals with evidence. With the trials right now with O.J. Simpson, they talk about forensic science. With Kobe Bryant right now, and all these other trials going on. With you have evidence of things that took place. How you do it, you apply forensic science to piece together pieces of evidence and try to find a trail of what took place first, second, third, fourth, and how it all transpired. Creationists and evolutionists looks at the fossil. The science of the fact is there's fossils. The fossil won't change a million years from now, or 100 years from now. That fossil will still be a fossil. That's the scientific fact. The fact is, the other question is, how did that fossil get here? Well, we don't know empirically. We weren't there. And so, but we have evidence of somebody who says he was there. God. He claims to have been there and was a witness to it, and he told us what he wanted us to know. So the fossil, we know one thing. If you leave a dead dog out there in the grass today, it won't turn into a fossil. Why? Scavengers will pick it apart. It'll get moved by ground crew. It'll be thrown into a dumpster. What also makes fossils, if you put a big boulder on top of that dead carcass, it smashes all the bones. So you need something to embed it into a surface that's pliable, and the surface has got to be pliable itself, so it can be embedded with great weight without disturbing that entire carcass. And so we find that, yes, that's how fossils are formed. Well, what's the best way to explain how the fossils were formed? The flood of Noah is one of the best ways I've ever heard of for the existence of fossils. That's why there's clamshells on top of every mountain range of the whole world, for one reason. And so no, creationists do not, we love science. We love true science. We just don't fall for anything that says they're science. I love to have these religious leaders who testified they have to go to the science and not the Bible for the creation of the world. Hey, religious leaders, look at Piltdown man now. Look at Nebraska man now. Look at embryonic recapitulation now. Look at all these scientific theories you thought was fact, and they've all been blown out of the water, and nobody believes them anymore. Yes?
So, since you guys say that you believe in true science, how do you determine whether it's true?
It's called falsification. If you cannot prove it wrong, in geometry it's called the indirect proof method. You try to prove certain things wrong by other facts that you already have established as truth. And if it can be observed, repeated, and demonstrated over and over again, the same exact result. For example, gravity. I don't care how many times I throw that Bible up in the air, it's going to hit that podium. That's a scientific law, that's a fact. It happens every time with observation, repeatableness, and that's called true science. Yes?
But don't you think that with science, like you were saying, things change, and in order for science to be better, there must be a change. Like, for instance, back in the day, you couldn't just cure a cold, people died of that. But because of science, you don't die of a common cold. We don't just automatically die of tuberculosis,
Well, man's knowledge of science changes. Sure, it changes hopefully every day. But science, true existence of reality does not change. Man's knowledge and learning of reality changes all the time. But, for example, Newton did not discover gravity. He basically just defined it, explained its principles. And so, gravity always was around. Science never changed on gravity, but man's knowledge of gravity changed, and therefore defined it and refined it and used it and built upon it. And so, the common code, our knowledge of common code has increased, not too substantially, but it does now, where we don't die from it, of course. It doesn't turn into flu and pneumonia too much. But the code, the DNA for the code germs and the virus itself has not changed. We just learned more about it. Oh, and I want to say this, that Darwin did not know about the electron microscope in his day. And you can almost say, in a loose sense, he was kind of free to assume natural selection through evolutionary means, because he did not know about the DNA blueprint for life, or the code for life. There's a law that genetics operates by. If you don't have a certain sequence, you have non-life. You have death and chaos. Yes?
When do you believe the dinosaurs were created? Were they created on like the same day as the land animals?
Yes, same day. In Job 40, I'll just make reference to it, let's go and read it. Job 40, in chapter 40 and chapter 41, tells us of two dinosaurs. Even names them. One is Behemoth, which means huge or massive. The other one's name is Leviathan. In the Bible, you won't find the word dinosaur, but you'll find the word dragons. And you'll find that, dragons are great lizards in the Hebrew. And every American culture has tales of dragons. And people going out there and slaying the dragons. The Loch Ness Monster myth, which we haven't, some have gotten pictures of it, and it's not been too conclusive. But some say that those pleciosaurus are still alive in swamps. And so, there's where the dinosaurs were.
All right, you admit that science is proving things by things that can be repeated and tested. So under natural circumstances, how do you explain, radiation decay, radioactive decay, is it constant under natural circumstances, right? You didn't admit that?
No,
Like carbon.
the dating methods have been shown to be faulty, even the argon, potassium argon, the carbon-14, all these dating systems, most of them have to start with an assumption of how old the geological column is in the first place, and they say, well, okay, we find this to be in compliance with the geological column, but the geological column does not exist anywhere in the whole universe except for in a textbook. It's a myth and a figment of a scientist's imagination, and they say, okay, we found this rock here, and it fits in this category over here, so that means this shows that it's this many years old, but we also judge the geological column by this category of the dating method, and so it's a self-contradictory event of assuming how old something is by the half-life of something else, and they've taken different specimens, different readings of the same thing, and got many conflicting reports, and so that's not a very accurate dating method, or any of them are.
As we get into kind of the nitty-gritty of the scientific details, maybe that's, because we could kind of go on with this, but I need to get on to my second hour. But why don't we take, a 5-minute break. Those of you who have some questions for Jim, can you stay around a few minutes to answer any of the questions during our break? The rest of you might need a coffee or a smoke or something, take a break now.
I'll make the transcript
And,
available.
yeah,
for
we've got
anybody.
I can get those Xeroxed right now during the break. We're going to get you a card. I want to thank Jim for coming in.
Well, thank you, Dr. Messer, for inviting me here.
I can make some copies of this while we take our break.
I was fearing that I was going to be redundant, but was I redundant today?
I think in the matter of the transcripts of the trial, that's been mentioned, but they've never actually heard the actual.
Great.
I think that's a really good addition.
Great.
Let's see. We need, well, I want a copy and you want a copy. Let's make 16 copies. Yeah, if you can double-sided, you make 16 copies, double-sided, 7 pages. And have you got a card, or you need to get this there? Oh, what's this?
It's an exhaustive of the Bible. Every word in the Old Testament's in there, with the reference and the Hebrew and Greek definition. I brought that in case I was going to be asked that question.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know a reference for it.
Do you
Yes.
think that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 contradict each other?
No.
Chapter 1 and 2.
Some people, there are basically 2 creation stories in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Genesis 2 starts with, I think, verse 6 or 7. Genesis 1 is a general creation of the whole world and universe. But then you find that God makes man in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And the Lord God planted a garden. So we find man's made first, then the garden, eastward in Eden. And there he put man whom he had formed. Now the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree. So here, Genesis 2 is talking about the creation within the garden after man's created to show man what God could do. Look at him, tree. Look at him, there's an elephant. Look at him, dinosaur. Look at him, lizard. Look at him, flowers. Look at him, dog. And so the second creation story in Genesis 2 is in the garden in front of Adam. Yeah, that's in any Christian bookstore. So the Strong's just
What translation do you have in your Bible?
King James.
King James?
I hope I didn't go too fast today in my talking.
Well, it was a lot to try to get into
Right.
to a small amount of time, but they had heard about this questioning of Brian by Darrow, and in the readings and stuff, it's been referred to, but I don't think any of our readings actually had actual, or the entire transcript, which you'll be able to see. I think what I heard in those transcripts, maybe y'all did too. Did you catch how many of those phrases actually ended up in the movie? Isn't that amazing? I mean, today we have something called plagiarism. You know, I mean, I don't know that, you know, they say it's not an actual record of the trial, but I was amazed at how many of the lines from the play just pulled
I
right
don't
out.
believe I've ever seen Inherit the Wind movie.
You ought to watch it. It's very, as far as entertainment, or as far as, yeah, it's a flawed representation of the trial itself.
Right.
But it's good drama, sure, art, you know, whatever.
I hear they have him put in jail and the whole works, right?
Oh, they have him in jail. It's like they're going to crucify him. The crowd's going
Lynch him.
to lynch him. Yeah, it's just, yeah, it's
Reminiscent of a KKK meeting, huh?
Yeah, really, it's very, it dramatizes everything, and it introduces characters. There's a kind of unidimensional creature there, hell and brimstone, hellfire and brimstone teacher, who's just sort of a cartoon, you know, creature. He's just,
Right.
you know, everybody's going to hell kind of thing, you know, and he condemns his own daughter, and he condemns, you know, he's almost on the verge of a psychotic breakdown himself, you know, and it kind of uses him as sort of a punching bag, you know, and then it really makes Brian, or the Brian character, look sort of ridiculous, you know, always gorging himself and wanting to be affable and friendly, but not too smart. You know, it's very unkind.
Right.
Brian.
The best part is always that, like he's going to the chair or something, and it's $100 fine.
Yeah, that Scopes is gonna, we're gonna electrocute you for this. But why we watch that is, I think so many people, that's where most people that know anything about the Scopes trial probably know of it, because of the popularity of that movie in the 60s, which is still shown on TV, Turner Network, and occasionally it's still shown around college campuses and stuff, and you can rent it at video stores. So anybody that watches it might think, hey, that's kind of what happened.
No. Did you have your hand up?
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering if you thought that incest is morally wrong, or if it's just wrong because it causes genetic mutations.
Well, God just said don't do it, so since he said don't do it, it also makes it morally wrong. But the reason why he said don't do it, I think, because he knows about the genetic mutations of the radiation. Now, I just heard yesterday on the news, driving up here, they did a new study, and they went through Darwin having his first cousin, and somebody else, 2 other famous people had their first cousins. And they said it only raises mutations or genetic problems with 3% of other normal. So, yes.
You explained where the water for the Great Flood came from, but you didn't say where it went after the flood.
Okay. Well, the Bible in Psalm says God raised the mountains and lowered the earth. So you have the mountains going up, draining all the water off, and lowered the earth, so the basin and the waters are what we call oceans. So it's still here. Yes.
I understand that you say that you can't take the Bible as
Please. I was going to say, that explains why there's clamshells on top of mountain ranges, because they used to be underneath the earth, or underneath the water. Okay.
I understand that you say that you can't take the Bible as literal, right, or some parts of the Bible, but why could you, if you can't do that, why is it so possible that you could take Genesis and say, this is how man was created? And that's the most literal thing that I hear creationists saying all the time, because it's like, okay, this verse says this verse says that, and it's like, this is exactly how man was created, but then when you talk about other parts of the Bible, no, that's not possible, you can't take that as literal. It's like, almost as if, to defend what you believe in, you only take that part as literal, but you deny some other facts about the Bible.
Yeah, to escape selective criticism, of being selective in our interpretation, you take the Bible as you would any other document or text you ever come across. Any book, this transcript. You know, how do we know that's not metaphorical, the whole thing? Well, you take everything you read on the first law of hermeneutics, you take it for its plain, literal, evidentiary meaning. You take this book, you read it for the plain, literal meaning that you can. Every textbook you read in college or high school or will read in your life, you attempt to take it as plain, literal meaning for the words within their semantical ranges of their definitions, And if you can't do that, for example, you're the salt of the earth, all right, let's take it for its plain literal meaning. It means I'm sodium chloride. Well, I know I'm not sodium chloride. So therefore, it cannot be literal. It must be something else, whether it's a simile or whether it's a parable or a metaphor or an allegory or a metonym or whatever. So you first attempt to take it literally. That should be the first attempt. And so some people don't, they come to the Bible less than honest, and they come to the Bible not wanting to take it, or at least trying to take it literally first. And I have found no conflict or no scientific conflict or biblical conflict of taking Genesis literally as a six-day literal creation.
Well, that does kind of open up an interesting question, though. I mean, you say you start by you take it literally, and then if it's sort of kind of obviously I'm not sodium chloride, yeah. Well, I think that's what many scientists would say, that they look at in the same way that, you know, we can take and see that my body is not just sodium chloride. So that's a figurative, you know, metaphorical kind of statement,
right,
poetic or whatever. There are scientists who say, well, we've looked, and in our minds, the age of the Earth is established as millions or billions of years, and kind of do the same thing. Say, well, then Genesis is also allegorical or poetic or metaphorical. I guess it
right.
It's kind of allowing sort of different standards, you know, because I suppose, I mean, I'm kind of thinking through this as I say it, but, you know, to you, the salt of the earth is obviously incorrect, so it's meant to be metaphorical. There are people who say, well, that 6 literal days is obviously incorrect because of the science that backs up an older earth. So that's, do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
There's kind of an opening for, does where you stop literally and where somebody else stops literally does kind of open up differences in personal sort of, where you draw the line and where I draw the line, or she draws the line, you draw the line, is going to differ. And so we maybe do have some legitimate basis for disagreement on some
Sure.
subjects.
So like what you said, you can either go to science to interpret the Bible, or go to the Bible to interpret science. Now, William Jennings Bryan was doing good the first part of the questioning. He went to the Bible and stated the Bible. But then he went to and referred to the science to interpret Genesis 1 and 2. The science part of it is that we have a universe. That's the scientific, we can observe it every day. That's the scientific fact. Now, how it got here, that's where the theory comes into play. You know, that's where you leave the realm of empirical science and jump into forensic science and the reasons why you have the evidence. You have evidence. And so there's different good websites out there. Ken Ham has a good website. Kent Hovind, these are all creation scientists. Institute for Creation Research has a good website. And one book, Darwin's Black Box, is a good book. What evolutionists have to say themselves, most of them are now going from a slow process over millions of years to a quick quantum processes and leaps over millions of years. Were you aware of that in the science world?
Yeah. You were talking about ICR, Dwayne Gish, and
right.
Well, I like his phrase for herky-jerky evolution and stuff like that.
Right.
Rebecca had a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you believe in global warming.
Pardon?
If you believe in global warming.
Do I believe in global warming as the environmentalists put it out in the news today? No. No.
I knew that, like, the Bush administration is saying that
Thank you.
global warming is only occurring because we're coming out of the ice age. But if dinosaurs lived at the same time as man, and then there would be no asteroid to wipe them out, and so there would be no ice age. So we wouldn't be coming out of the ice age. So I was wondering.
Because see, the facts are, science is, we have an Earth. We have ice caps, polar ice caps, right? That's fact. That's the evidence. Now we have to go, why is that? The best theories I've read about is that before the flood of Noah, this Earth was on a 0-degree axis. And now we're what, we're 23.2 degrees axis?
Yeah, 22,
22.3?
yeah, something like that.
And so now we have a 22.3 axis. All right, and you remove the water canopy had this tropical greenhouse effect. It's a perfect climate. The earth was perfect before God cursed it. You can't forget that this earth's been cursed from sin and the flood and everything else. We think the world's beautiful now. It was a lot better before God destroyed it, the flood. So the greenhouse effect, with a 0 degree axis, we had no hot and cold spots. Now we have hot and cold spots. The equator is very hot, polars are cold. We find and have found, or still continue to find, entire whole frozen mammoths in ice. And I've seen a picture of one. He's hunched down like this on his hands and knees, as if some big hand just took this mammoth and forced him down, and he's frozen and has green vegetation buttercups in his mouth and buttercups in his stomach that's not been digested yet. They were snap frozen, like bird's eye does vegetables. And so, and the amount of coldness, instantaneous coldness it takes to snap freeze a mammoth, from the inside out, would be tremendous. And so we have the evidence. We have a mammoth. Okay, we can observe it, test it, and demonstrate it. They've taken meat off that mammoth and eaten it. It's been fresh. It's fresh for all these years. And so, we have mammoths. But how did they get there? How was he eating buttercups one day and snap frozen another day? Explain that. So, that's the science, to try to interpret what happens, what we see and observe. That's where we leave empirical science and jump into theory. Which
I'm going to have to cut you off because I've got to get some stuff done.
Okay. This is going forever.
Yeah, really. And it will continue. I mean, it's all over the nation right now in schools and so on.
Right, it sure is.
Y'all have a copy of the actual transcripts that you read from today. Brittany's going to hand out the little short essay portion of the last exam and a study guide. And I'm going to take Jim upstairs to get his coat and walk him out, and then I'll be back.